"You're evicting your own son?" Jason asked, stunned. "And his wife," Evelyn replied, sliding the notice across the table. She'd raised him, fed him, even paid for the roof over his head. But now, that roof belonged to her, legally, entirely, unapologetically. All it took was one signature and decades of being underestimated. They called her fragile. She answered with a court order. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe." They thought I was too soft to fight back. They forgot velvet hide steel. Evelyn heard it before she felt it. Natalie's voice, low, sugar-dipped venom, slipped through the cracked hallway door like smoke. "She's too fragile to matter anymore. One breeze and she'll be gone." Evelyn stood frozen at the corner of the wall, tea in one hand, the bruise from her fall still blooming across her forearm. The sting wasn't on her skin, it was in her bones. She turned and walked back to the sunroom, her new wing of the house, as Natalie called it. It used to be a quiet sanctuary for morning coffee and her husband's old paperbacks. Now it felt like exile in glass. The light poured in, warm and indifferent. Outside, birds danced along the fence she helped install 25 years ago. She sat in the armchair with the green throw blanket, hers, and set the tea down without sipping it. Her fingers trembled, not from weakness, from restraint. Dinner was a performance. Natalie, in her flawless makeup and silk blouse, passed the salt across the table with a tight smile. Evelyn reached for it carefully, her hand still sore. "Oh, careful," Natalie cooed, voice dripping with mock concern. "We don't want another fall, do we?" Jason snorted lightly, glancing away. "Come on, Nat." But Natalie just giggled, taking a long sip of wine. "I mean, she is delicate." Evelyn said nothing, just nodded once, slowly. Then she opened the small, leather-bound journal hidden under her napkin. She turned to a fresh page. April 7th. Salt joke. Bruise still sore. Jason laughed. Things not to forget. Later that night, when the house was dark and the thermostat clicked softly in the background, Evelyn opened the top drawer of her old writing desk. Beneath a stack of thank you cards and yellowed photographs was a velvet envelope, deep burgundy, sealed with a wax stamp that had long since crumbled. She'd never dared to open it before. Her husband had left it in his will, separate from the legal documents. He called it a just in case. She'd assumed he meant grief, or loneliness, or taxes. But tonight, his voice echoed back to her without sound. In case they forget who kept this family standing. Her hands didn't tremble now. She unsealed the envelope and pulled out a single folded sheet, thick parchment, aged but strong. At the top, her husband's familiar handwriting, bold, neat, unwavering. "You own the land, they just walk on it." Her breath caught. She read it again. Below it, stapled to the letter, was a notarized document. A clause, legally binding, signed by both of them 10 years ago. Land severance clause, co-ownership revocation. To be enacted at her sole discretion with one signature. She flipped the page. At the bottom was one final instruction, scrawled in darker ink. "Only if they make you feel small." Evelyn sat back, the silence of the house wrapping around her like velvet and steel. She looked out through the sunroom glass, where Natalie's reflection had once danced in laughter. She wasn't laughing now. No one was. She placed the envelope gently on the desk, then opened the drawer and pulled out a pen. The tip hovered over the line. Her fingers didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. Her heart didn't question. She exhaled once, softly, then pressed the pen to paper. "They stuck me in the sunroom, but I saw everything from there." They thought they'd boxed her in. 4 glass walls, 1 recliner, a shelf of dust-covered books, a place to keep the furniture that still spoke. But Evelyn had a view of everything, and some thrones weren't carved in wood. They were made of knowing when to wait. It was a Tuesday morning, just past 11 o'clock, when Evelyn noticed the flicker of blue light bouncing off the kitchen tile. Natalie sat at the breakfast nook, legs crossed, tablet in hand, scrolling with manicured precision. The words on the screen were unmistakable even from Evelyn's distance. Listing price. Renovated colonial. Cash buyer preferred. Evelyn's fingers curled slowly around her teacup. Natalie tilted the screen toward Jason, who hovered nearby, chewing on a cuticle. I'm just saying, we could list it quietly, under a trust, off-market, Natalie said, sipping iced coffee like this wasn't someone else's home. No fuss, no drama, get her situated and this place is ours to upgrade. Jason didn't look at her. He didn't look at anything. Can we not call it situated? Natalie rolled her eyes. Assisted living sounds harsher. We'll nudge her gently. She's been more confused lately anyway, haven't you noticed? Evelyn had. Not the confusion, the assumption. She stood and shuffled to the kitchen doorway. Tea, anyone? She asked, her voice soft but unshaken. Natalie nearly jumped. Oh, no, I'm good, she chirped, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jason nodded without looking up. Thanks, Mom, I'm fine. Evelyn turned and walked back to the sunroom, placing the porcelain kettle on the warmer. With a trembling hand, she stirred her own cup, added lemon, and returned to her recliner, the one they thought looked grandmotherly enough to contain her. She sipped and stared. That night, after the house settled into fake peace, Evelyn opened the filing cabinet in the hallway closet. It hadn't been touched in years. Jason and Natalie didn't even know the key still existed. Inside, wrapped in faded blueprints and brittle legal envelopes, were the original architectural plans to the house. She laid them out on the kitchen table under a yellowed overhead bulb. At the bottom of one schematic, in careful ink, sunroom, add-on, separate deed, owner, Evelyn M. Harper. Her fingers stilled over her own name, flashback. Her husband standing in the middle of a half-built frame, hammer still swinging, saying, "This room's yours, Ev, every inch, in your name, just in case anyone ever forgets who put the first brick down." And she'd laughed then. Why would they forget that? She didn't laugh now. She flipped through another manila folder and found the signed clause again. Land severance clause. Active upon co-resident dismissal, disrespect, or manipulation. Every line gleamed now like lit fuses. Morning came quiet, with a low fog outside the windows and the hum of traffic beyond the hedges. Evelyn dressed in her slate-gray cardigan and laced her shoes without asking for help. She picked up her black leather bag, slid the architectural folder inside, and checked the small watch her husband once polished every Sunday. 8:04 a.m. The courthouse opened in 26 minutes. She made tea, wrote a single note on the fridge, gone out, no need to call, and closed the door behind her. She stepped into the county office that morning with the deed in one hand, and her silence sharpened into strategy in the other. Every sip they took, I counted. Every whisper, I recorded. Evelyn didn't need to be invited into the conversation. She only needed to stand quietly in the hallway, one hand resting on the sunroom archway, the kettle still warm behind her, when she heard Natalie whisper, "Her move-out date will be sooner than she thinks." The words hung in the air longer than the scent of Earl Grey. Natalie was perched at the kitchen island again, phone pressed between shoulder and cheek, eyes flicking across her laptop. Yes, full renovation, open concept, white quartz counters. Yes, she's still here. No, she doesn't know, yet. A light chuckle. We'll frame it as downsizing. She'll be grateful once she sees the brochure for assisted living. Soft pillows, gardens, guilt-free relocation. Evelyn stood still, invisible in her own home, her breath shallow but steady. Later that afternoon, Natalie left her laptop open while she slipped upstairs for a facial mask. Evelyn approached it like a surgeon. No haste, no hesitation. The inbox was open. Second tab, real estate correspondence. Subject, tentative timeline and elder transition. Attached, listing draft. Note, if possible, stage the sunroom first. Buyers love that light. There it was, her future erased in Arial font. That night, at dinner, Natalie passed Evelyn a small plate of steamed vegetables and touched her shoulder like a nurse pretending care. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. We've just been looking into future options, just, casually. Just exploring, Natalie echoed, pouring more wine. Nothing to stress about. Evelyn smiled. Warm, empty, controlled. Lovely, she said. Exploring is healthy. Then she sipped her tea, one slow drag of porcelain to lip, and watched them both over the rim. After they went to bed, Evelyn retrieved the small wooden box from her closet. It looked like a decorative tea caddy, mahogany finish, delicate carvings, a tiny brass latch. But inside, nestled between peppermint and chamomile, was a discreet black camera no larger than a thumb joint. Motion activated. High clarity. It had belonged to her husband, insurance agent by profession, quiet sleuth by passion. He'd once told her, "Sometimes protection starts with perspective." She placed the box carefully on the corner of the kitchen counter the next morning, exactly where Natalie liked to sit with her latte and gossip-laced calls. By the end of the week, she had footage, clear, ugly, Natalie laughing over brunch with two friends on speakerphone. "She shakes like a broken bobblehead. Can you imagine her in a courtroom? They'd think we're doing charity." One of the women cackled. Another asked, "Can you legally kick her out yet?" Natalie's answer, "She barely knows what day it is. She'll forget she even lived here." Evelyn didn't flinch as she watched it. She simply slid the USB into her laptop, uploaded the footage to a secure drive labeled Sunroom Tapes, and composed an email. To hr@luxrealtypartners.com. From anonymous witness @protonmail.com. Subject, concerning behavior of employee, Natalie Harper Linden. Dear HR Director, please find attached a video that may reflect poorly on your representative's behavior toward a co-resident elder in her household. This is shared with concern for ethics and safety, not vengeance. Sincerely, a witness who saw too much. She clicked send, then made tea, 2 cups. Sat alone, drank both. The next morning, Natalie looked rattled. She was quiet over breakfast, tapping her phone screen like it owed her an explanation. Jason asked if she was okay. Natalie forced a smile. "Just work drama. Someone's stirring trouble." Evelyn stirred her tea. "You know what they say," she said gently. "When you stir, you'd better be ready for what rises." Natalie blinked. But Evelyn didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. That evening, Natalie's phone rang with a caller ID she didn't recognize. She stepped outside to take it, only for her voice to rise on the porch. "HR wants what? Who sent that?" Inside, Evelyn closed the curtains one panel at a time. They saw trinkets. I saw transactions. The lock clicked like a whisper. Old, deliberate, waiting. Evelyn opened the velvet-lined jewelry box, the one Natalie once called adorable vintage clutter, with a reverence usually reserved for vaults. No pearls, no diamonds. Just truth. And truth didn't sparkle. It documented. Inside lay manila envelopes worn soft at the folds. Tucked beneath them, 3 checkbook ledgers bound in faded elastic, corners dog-eared, ink smudged with time. Receipts were clipped together by year. Property tax stubs, certified mail slips, original purchase documents, all in her name, all in her handwriting, not Jason's, certainly not Natalie's. She laid them out across the kitchen table in perfect lines: land purchase, foundation permits, first mortgage, joint, but with her pension used for the down payment, refinancing, secured by her inheritance after her mother passed, final property tax installment, paid entirely from her late husband's life insurance, deposited straight into her personal account. Flashback. It was raining the day her husband died. The living room smelled like antiseptic and carnations. Everyone else huddled around casseroles and sympathy cards, but Evelyn sat at the dining table with a calculator. "I need to find the gap," she had murmured. Because even in grief, someone had to check the numbers. She remembered Jason telling her years ago, "Dad handled the big stuff, right?" Number she had. Quietly, precisely, without applause. But Natalie once peeked into the box and said, "Sweet, your little keepsakes." That was the moment Evelyn had labeled it something else entirely. The ledger. Now, with receipts as her allies, she opened her laptop. She didn't go to her usual bookmarked legal site. She typed a new URL, one her husband had mentioned over coffee once, a firm that helps widows disappear legally, or reappear stronger. She opened a private browser tab and created a new email account, matriarch45@protonmail.com. She uploaded every page into a digital folder named Proof of Ownership and composed the message. 2. ellsworth.legal.consulting@protonmail.com. Subject: Estate Inquiry, Confidential. I'm seeking counsel on an estate situation involving a property I largely paid for but am being quietly erased from. Enclosed: itemized financial documentation, land contracts, and tax statements. I would prefer to remain anonymous until we speak. Alias, M.H. Ledger. She hesitated only once before clicking send. The sound of the email swooshing off into the unknown felt like a match lighting in her chest. A small fire, but one she'd been stacking kindling quietly, for decades. The next morning she found the reply waiting like a gift wrapped in professionalism. Subject: Initial review complete. Dear Ms. Ledger, we've reviewed your submission and cross-referenced local deed archives. Based on what you've shared and our independent verification, you own more than they think. We'd like to schedule a secure call. Warm regards, Ellsworth Legal. Evelyn exhaled, not in relief, in confirmation. She closed the jewelry box, relocked it, and placed it back under her bed, not because it held valuables, but because now she knew. She was one. Outside, Natalie watered the roses like she owned the garden. Evelyn, watching from the window, smiled for the first time in days, not with joy, but with precision. They laughed at my frailty. I signed away their fantasy. The signature line stared up at her like an open door. One stroke of ink, and she would no longer be the fragile woman in the sunroom. She would be the owner. They forgot she already was. Evelyn picked up the pen and pressed. The moment the tip touched paper, something in her spine straightened. Her breath deepened. The line across the page wasn't shaky. It was measured, clean, final. The land severance clause, once just a folded memory inside a velvet envelope, was now active. Not metaphorically, legally. Evelyn Harper, age 72, now held 68% ownership of the property, including the land, the original foundation, and the sunroom that had become her throne. Jason and Natalie? They were no longer co-owners. They were residents, and soon, tenants. The following morning, a courier arrived just before sunrise. Neutral tan uniform, a thick folder sealed and notarized. He handed it to Natalie at the door with a professional nod. Delivery for Jason and Natalie Linden, confirmed signatories. Natalie frowned. What is this? Change of property control. Please see attached documents and terms. Jason stepped in from behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What the hell is going on? Evelyn sipped her tea in the background, seated in her usual spot by the sunroom window. The morning light framed her like a portrait. She didn't need to say a word. Inside the envelope, a formal letter from Ellsworth Legal, a registered deed update, a tenant lease agreement, an eviction clause if the lease was refused. Natalie flipped through the pages like they were on fire. This has to be a mistake. She can't. Jason, can she do this? Jason read silently, his jaw tightening. She already did, he muttered. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat around the dining table, but it wasn't a family meal. It was a negotiation, or rather, an attempted one. We just want to understand what this means, Jason said, keeping his voice level. This house was ours. It's where we raised our kids, where I grew up. You helped us move back in. Evelyn stirred honey into her tea. Correction, she said calmly. I let you move back in. Help was never part of the deal. Natalie slammed the folder shut. This is spiteful. You're using grief like a weapon. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Grief isn't a weapon, but forgetting who carried the load? That's what breaks families. Jason reached across the table. Mom, please, can we just slow this down? Evelyn set her spoon down gently, her voice softer now, but heavier. Funny how fragile I seemed until I picked up a pen. Natalie stormed upstairs. Jason stayed behind, shoulders sagging. I didn't know, he whispered. I know you didn't, Evelyn said, but silence is its own signature. That evening, while Natalie paced in the bedroom with her phone glued to her ear, Evelyn sat in the garden with a book on her lap. She didn't read it, just held it, soaking in the golden hour sunlight. The roses Natalie had overwatered were finally blooming properly again. Inside, Natalie's voice rose behind a closed door. "What do you mean the listing is flagged? Litigation? What litigation? She can't sue over her own house." Pause. More frantic whispering. "What do you mean I can't list it until ownership is settled? I am ownership." Another pause, then softer. "Hello?" The call ended. Natalie didn't scream. This time she sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window like the horizon had betrayed her. Down in the garden, Evelyn looked up from her book as the porch light flickered on. She smiled faintly to herself and whispered, "One signature." Then she closed the book, on more than just the chapter. They assumed the will was final. It was just the beginning. The safe clicked open with a hiss, like something exhaling secrets. Natalie leaned forward, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from entitlement disguised as urgency. She pulled out the leather binder labeled "Last Will and Testament, J. Harper," flipping pages with the desperation of someone searching for her name in bold. It was there, but only once, and far lower than she'd remembered. Jason stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, trying not to look panicked. "We just need to see if there's anything outdated, something she missed." Natalie's eyes scanned each paragraph like a predator reading prey behavior. "I know he had a clause for spousal security," she murmured. "But there has to be something, anything that lets us contest her power grab." "Power grab?" Jason asked. "Or just power she already had?" Natalie's head snapped toward him. "You're really doing this now?" Jason held up both hands. I'm just saying, maybe she's not bluffing." Natalie turned back to the documents and muttered under her breath, "She's bluffing like a poker pro with the winning hand." At the very back of the binder, beneath a sheaf of property disclosures, Natalie found a thinner folder labeled Will, previous version, 2011, voided. She paused, then opened it. Inside, her name was missing entirely. Every beneficiary line listed Evelyn, with charitable distributions to elder care initiatives and a college fund for a local girls' shelter. No Natalie, no Jason even, just Evelyn and Justice. Natalie blinked. "Why keep this?" Jason stepped forward and quietly read the final page. "This version voided by update requested by Jason and Natalie Linden, 2013. He swallowed. "I remember that meeting." Natalie scoffed. "We were promised stability." Jason said nothing, but Evelyn hadn't. She had archived the version they thought they erased. Across the hall, in the quiet calm of her sunroom, Evelyn sat in front of her laptop. The screen glowed with file names lined up like dominoes. Audio recording 3.wave. She's a dying leftover, clinging to her porch like she matters. Video capture 5.mp4. Natalie on speakerphone. We wait for her to trip over her own shadow, then move in. Easy. She uploaded each file one by one into a private drive. Folder name, evidence, active encrypted, time-stamped, undeniable. She clicked open a browser window and returned to the legal dashboard her new lawyer had given her access to. Action. Reactivate prior will, 2011, filed under elder coercion and psychological abuse. Status, initiated. All she needed were supporting recordings. All she needed was her truth. The law finally would listen. The next morning, at Natalie's real estate office, her phone buzzed twice during a listing pitch. She silenced it. A third time, and her assistant knocked gently at the conference room door. "Sorry, Natalie. HR wants to speak with you." Natalie blinked. "About what?" "I think it's about something sent anonymously. From inside your home." Natalie's eyes narrowed. Her breath caught. Her mind flashed to wine-soaked rants and tea boxes on countertops. "Tell them I'll be there in a moment," she said, but her voice cracked, just enough to betray the fault line forming. Across town, Evelyn watched the email receipt confirm, "Video evidence submitted successfully. Thank you for helping us maintain ethical conduct standards." She took a sip of lemon tea and muttered, Let the record show I was never the fragile one. They invited me to dinner like it was a peace offering. It was a final meal. The table was set for reconciliation. Candlelight flickered off polished cutlery. Crystal wine glasses sparkled like apologies waiting to be poured. The roast was perfectly sliced, the salad tossed with care. It would have looked like a gesture of love if Evelyn hadn't already seen the envelope Natalie tried to hide in the trash that morning. Conduct investigation. HR response. Pending. Evelyn took her seat at the head of the table, the one Natalie used to claim with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. Tonight, Natalie poured the wine instead. To family, she said with a tight smile, lifting her glass. Jason echoed, to moving forward. Evelyn raised her glass and clinked softly. To adjusting terms. The first crack in Natalie's smile showed, barely, but Evelyn saw it. Dinner moved with rehearsed ease. Jason made awkward jokes about old times, and Natalie complimented the sunroom's new curtains as if she hadn't once called them funeral chic. Evelyn nodded politely, cutting her roast with deliberate slowness. Strange, she murmured. How fast things shift when leases come into play. Jason paused mid-bite. Come again? Evelyn glanced at the walls. This house. It used to feel heavier, full of assumption. Now it feels expectant. Natalie tried to laugh. We just wanted to do something nice. It's been a tense week. You're not wrong, Evelyn said, setting her fork down with a light clink. Deadlines often carry tension. Dessert was a lemon tart, Evelyn's favorite, though she hadn't mentioned it in years. Natalie placed the slice gently in front of her. I baked it myself. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Brave. Jason leaned forward. Mom, we know things got complicated, but we were hoping maybe you'd be willing to revisit the lease. Consider a more cooperative arrangement, Natalie added, voice suddenly brittle under the sweetness. Evelyn sipped her wine. Of course. Natalie exhaled in visible relief. I'd be happy to clarify the lease terms, Evelyn said, reaching into her cardigan pocket. She slid a small ivory envelope across the table. Jason frowned. What's this? Natalie snatched it before he could touch it. She tore it open, scanned the paper, and her shoulders stiffened. Jason leaned over, reading quickly. It was a formal lease agreement, drawn up by Evelyn's lawyer, notarized and signed. Rent due, market rate term, month-to-month enforcement, immediate upon receipt. Natalie's voice was ice. You can't do this. Evelyn set her wineglass down. I already did. Silence hit the table like a dropped dish. Jason's lips parted, but no sound came out. Natalie shot up from her chair, the paper shaking in her hand. You think this is fair, after everything we've done for you? Evelyn stayed seated. You housed me in a sunroom I bought. You whispered about institutions over risotto. You called me fragile, and now? She tapped the lease with a calm hand. You'll call me landlord. Jason stood too. Mom, please. We're trying. No, Evelyn said gently. You're negotiating. There's a difference. Natalie crumpled the paper in her fist. We won't pay. Evelyn tilted her head. Then I'll evict you. Kindly. Legally. The candles flickered again, casting shadow and light across her calm, unmoving face. Outside, a breeze picked up, rustling the roses that lined the garden walkway. Inside, Natalie's world, built on charm and confidence, began to tilt. She didn't have a retort. Jason didn't have a defense. And Evelyn? She didn't need either. She had proof, a paper trail, and now, paperwork. As Natalie stormed off down the hallway, Jason still frozen beside the untouched tart, Evelyn reached for her tea and said to no one in particular, Funny how quiet dinner becomes, when no one's left holding the knife. She said I was too fragile to matter. Now she pays me rent. Natalie ripped the lease in half. Right there, in the living room. Let her evict me, she spat, paper fluttering to the floor like falling pride. She doesn't have the stamina to see it through. Evelyn said nothing. She simply bent down, picked up the pieces, and placed them inside a manila folder labeled Refusal to Comply, Initial Violation. 2 days later, a notice appeared on the front door. Eviction proceeding initiated, 30 days to vacate or contest. It was crisp, laminated against rain and stapled in 4 corners. The HOA newsletter didn't mention names, but word traveled faster than wildfire when it smelled like family drama. By the end of the week, neighbors walked their dogs a little slower past Evelyn's home. Lawn chairs turned just slightly toward the porch. Mrs. Kessler from down the street even dropped by with banana bread, placing it on the sunroom table like an offering to a queen recently restored. "I don't want to get involved," she whispered, "but it's about time someone stood up to her." Evelyn offered a thin smile. "You just did." Jason tried to intervene, first with politeness, then panic. "We don't need to make this ugly, Mom. What happened to forgiveness?" Evelyn continued pruning her roses. "You watered silence for years," she replied. "Now you get the thorns." When he brought up family, Evelyn simply raised her gardening shears. "I am family. The rest is tenancy." Natalie, meanwhile, exploded in small, bitter detonations. She slammed doors loud enough to shake picture frames, moved furniture in aggressive silence. One afternoon, in a storm of frustration, she kicked the hallway console table so hard it cracked against the wall, splintering the drywall in a burst of plaster and fury. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching quietly. Natalie froze. "You're seriously going to document that?" "I already have," Evelyn said, "but thank you for confirming." That evening, Evelyn sat at her desk in the sunroom, fingers dancing across the keys. The T-box camera had captured everything: Natalie's tantrum, the damage, even her screaming, "I'll burn this place down before I pay her a dime." It uploaded seamlessly into a secured folder titled Incident Log, Damage Claim, Flashback. Her husband at the kitchen table, sliding her a manila envelope filled with deed paperwork and post-it tabs. "I don't need you to be loud," he'd said softly. "I just need you to be legal." She remembered that moment now, how scared she was to be the only one left, and how grateful she was that being underestimated had become her camouflage. The morning air was cool, unusually still. Natalie, wearing a crisp blouse and headset, was mid-sentence in a live webinar, speaking to a real estate class on the topic of professional integrity and client relations. She smiled through the camera. "Trust is everything in this business." That's when the knock came, sharp, repetitive. Jason opened the door to find a man in a collared shirt and vest standing on the porch, a leather folio tucked beneath his arm. "Linden residence?" Jason hesitated. "Yes?" The man offered a neutral smile. "I have a delivery for Ms. Natalie Linden. Legal documents. Requires signature." Jason froze. Natalie turned her head mid-broadcast, still on camera. "Who's at the—" The process server walked past the threshold and laid the envelope on the dining table beside her laptop. Civil suit, damages, defamation, unauthorized destruction of property. The camera was still rolling. So was her mic. Across the screen, her webinar chat lit up with confused comments. Did something just happen? Is that a legal notice? Is she being sued? Evelyn, sipping tea by the window, whispered, "And now, they all know who the landlord really is." They played the victim online, but the house knew the truth. The photo Natalie posted showed Evelyn from behind, frail, seated on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her shoulders sloped in the late afternoon light. The caption read, "When the person who raised you becomes your legal abuser, pray for peace in a house torn apart by greed." And just like that, the world picked a side. At least for a moment. The post went viral in under a day. "Protect your elders, family doesn't evict. Inheritance isn't ownership." Thousands of likes, dozens of shares, sympathy-filled comments from strangers who had no idea Evelyn had video footage of Natalie calling her a dying leftover with no say in her own house. Jason stood in the kitchen staring at his phone, mouth tight. This is a bad idea," he muttered. Natalie, at the dining table, scrolled through the avalanche of support. "People need to know how she's treating us," she said, voice calm but loaded. "We've been polite, patient, generous." Jason didn't argue. He didn't agree, either. Across the house, Evelyn sat in the sunroom, laptop open, reading every word of the post without blinking. She didn't reply. She didn't comment. She didn't defend herself. She simply opened a secure tab and messaged her lawyer. 2. legal@ellsworthfirm.com. Subject, defamatory statement. Public misrepresentation. Attached was a screenshot of the post, a transcript of Natalie's webinar audio, and a folder titled Contradictions Evidence. Within the hour, she received a short response. We're preparing a formal cease and desist. Silence is temporary. Strategy is permanent. By midweek, the fallout began to show. Natalie's broker, already uneasy after the HR incident, forwarded her post to corporate legal. The image, they said, violated client confidentiality by exposing an elder individual without written consent. She was quietly removed from 2 listing groups, then 3, then 5. A scheduled open house she was supposed to lead was handed to another agent. Natalie slammed her phone on the counter. "This is harassment!" Jason looked up from across the room. "This is backlash!" She glared at him. "You're taking her side now?" "No," he said, rubbing his temples. "I'm watching you destroy yours." And then came the client call. Jason had just sat down for lunch when his phone rang. It was Ms. Riley, the family friend who had trusted him with her small business's estate paperwork. "Jason," she said, polite but cold, "I saw the post, and I also saw the tags, the video clips, the lawsuit." Jason's heart sank. "I had nothing to do with the post." "I believe you," she interrupted, "but I can't afford the optics. I'm pulling the file. I'm sorry." The call ended. Jason stared down at his half-eaten sandwich, appetite gone. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk under the soft hum of a desk lamp. Rain ticked gently against the windows, but the house inside was silent. She opened her saved footage folder, scrolled to clip 12, and hit play. Natalie's voice echoed, "We'll toss her out quietly. Change the locks. Say she wandered. No filters, no edits, just pure, cruel intent." She downloaded the video, clipped it to exactly 58 seconds, and added a caption in white text on black background. "They told the internet I was the villain. Here's what they told each other." She posted it to a private advocacy group, then to a legal support page. Then she shared it publicly. No hashtags, no explanation, just truth. The views surged. Quietly at first, then like thunder over still water, and the comments began to shift. One message caught Evelyn's eye, sent anonymously. "I work with Natalie. We heard the full story. You're not alone anymore. They fought for my money like I was already dead." The safe hissed open, like it knew this moment was final. Evelyn removed a single folder, thinner than the original will, but heavier somehow. At the top, typed in bold, "Last Will and Testament, updated 2023 Executor, Evelyn M. Harper, primary beneficiary, the Matriarch Trust, Elder Advocacy and Shelter Fund, not Jason, not Natalie, no blood, no bonds, just legacy." She read it slowly, once, then again. Every line was clean, every clause deliberate. It named her lawyer as trustee, outlined the property division in detail, and redirected all insurance assets to the Matriarch Trust, a nonprofit she'd founded quietly 6 months earlier under a pseudonym, a quiet revolution, built in silence, funded by her endurance. Downstairs, Jason stood in the kitchen scrolling through bank statements on his phone. "Things aren't syncing anymore," he muttered. "Her accounts aren't even linked to the estate portal we set up last year." Natalie, pacing barefoot across the floor, barely looked up. "She's cutting us out!" she snapped. "Bit by bit, month by month." Jason lowered the phone. "Maybe we gave her reasons to." Natalie stopped. "What did you just say?" Jason shook his head. "Never mind." That evening, Evelyn called Jason to the sunroom. Just him. The light was soft, fading. Her voice matched it. "I want you to read something," she said, offering the folder without ceremony. Jason hesitated, then sat. The color drained from his face as he flipped page after page. "Everything? Is going to a charity?" "She needs it more than you do," Evelyn replied. "She?" "The one who's still in me. The version of myself you both tried to shrink." Jason looked up, eyes glassy. "Mom, I know we mishandled things. Natalie pushed too far, but I didn't mean to." "I know," Evelyn said, "but you stayed silent while she did." He leaned forward, voice cracking. "Don't do this. Don't shut me out." She placed a hand over his. "I'm not. I'm showing you the door. If you want a second chance, earn it. But not in this house." Jason left in silence. No slammed doors, no accusations, just the sound of someone carrying the weight of consequences down the stairs. 3 days later, Natalie came home to find a note on the kitchen table. "I'm staying at the Red Fern Motel. Don't follow me. Don't call her. Asan." For the first time since their carefully curated marriage began, the house felt unstable to her, not because it lacked warmth, but because the center of control was gone. She called her sister, then her mother, then her lawyer. "Are you saying you're filing for divorce?" the woman on the other end asked. Natalie stared out the window at Evelyn, calmly raking leaves. "I'm saying I married a spineless heir who let his mother burn the blueprint of our life." Click. Evelyn changed the locks that afternoon. She had the locksmith enter quietly. No big show, no confrontation. Just the crisp, mechanical sound of independence being reinstalled. When asked who to list on the master key access, Evelyn simply replied, "Just me." The next morning, she placed the new keys in a small drawer lined with velvet. Next to them sat the eviction papers, the lease agreement, the cease and desist, and now, the will, a timeline of reclamation, one document at a time. That evening, a gentle knock came at the door. It wasn't Jason. It wasn't Natalie. It was silence. Evelyn didn't open it. She didn't need to. The house was hers. Again. Fully. Upstairs, Natalie scrolled through her email to find a confirmation from the courthouse. Divorce petition filed, initial hearing scheduled. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But across the hall, the key she no longer held clicked in the lock, and Evelyn whispered to the empty hall, "They thought I was dying. I was just done waiting. I lived in the sunroom. Now they can't afford a doormat." The first thing Evelyn did was take down the blackout curtains in the master bedroom. Light poured in like it had been waiting. For years, that room belonged to Natalie's silence and Jason's retreat. Now, Evelyn ran her hand across the sun-warmed windowsill and whispered, "Mine again." And this time, not borrowed. Owned. She didn't hire decorators, didn't call contractors, just opened paint cans with names like Wild Rose, Dusty Periwinkle, and Restoration Gray, and got to work. Each brushstroke erased something. A comment, a condescension, a ghost of a woman she'd once been told to become. By week's end, the house no longer smelled like entitlement. It smelled like lemon oil, open windows, and lavender from the backyard. The living room now held bold watercolor paintings. Her own. The old mantel? Replaced with a hand-sanded shelf that bore 3 things. A photo of her and her husband, hands clasped, mid-laugh, a ceramic mug labeled Matriarch, a framed copy of the eviction notice, printed on high-quality linen paper, professionally matted, and hung dead center in her newly claimed office. Below it, a brass placard read, "Documentation over decibels." Her therapist, Evelyn's quiet ally through the unraveling storm, arrived for a scheduled home session and stood stunned in the entryway. "I almost didn't recognize the place," she said, blinking at the transformation. Evelyn gestured to the new gallery wall in the hall. "It's strange what happens when you reclaim square footage and self-worth at the same time." They sat with tea, lemon balm, steeped strong. The therapist smiled. "You don't look fragile now." Evelyn chuckled. "Never was. They just liked pretending I was." That evening, the mail arrived with its usual mix of catalogs and charity letters, but tucked among them, a manila envelope, hand-delivered, legal insignia at the corner. Recipient, Natalie Harper Linden Sender, Ellsworth and Company Legal Group. Subject, defamation, slander, emotional harm, civil action number 4309-B. Evelyn held it for a moment, not with triumph, but with certainty. She placed it on the entry table, beside the keys Natalie no longer had access to. The envelope sat like a declaration. This house remembers. So does the law. Flashback. Natalie's voice echoing from the hallway months ago. She's too fragile to matter anymore. Now Evelyn stood in the same hallway, framed in gold light, holding a lawsuit with Natalie's name on it. She mattered. Every square inch of her did. Upstairs, Evelyn opened what had once been Natalie's office. The space was sterile. White walls, sterile organization bins, zero soul. She brought in a single orchid, then unrolled a welcome mat at the door, floral and bold. It read, "This space is taken." Outside, neighbors waved again, longer now. Some walked up the porch just to say hello, a few even brought pie. Evelyn greeted each one warmly. Her voice didn't tremble, her spine didn't stoop, her eyes didn't flinch. That night, as she watered her roses under the moonlight, Evelyn's phone buzzed once. A notification lit up the screen. "Natalie Linden has been served." Evelyn exhaled, not out of relief, but out of promise kept. "They called me irrelevant. I funded a legacy instead." The laughter in the house was different now, not the brittle, performative chuckles that once echoed down its polished halls. This was belly deep, wrinkled, wise, and it belonged to women who had once been told they were too old to matter. Now they mattered here, in Evelyn Harper's house. On Tuesday afternoons, the parlor transformed. The coffee table became a scrapbook station. The fireplace, once silent under Natalie's rule, crackled with low warmth as hands, weathered, graceful, and full of stories, stitched quilts, painted ceramics, and spilled secrets they'd kept for decades. Some came with walkers, some with tears, all came with something to reclaim. Evelyn greeted each of them with the same phrase, "Welcome back to yourself." The charity had been a quiet idea, born months earlier during her late-night research. She'd filed the papers under the name Matriarch Trust and transferred 40% of her estate directly into its account. No gala, no ribbon cutting, just action. One day at a time, one woman at a time. The shelter partnership came next, a long-neglected senior center downtown that had been barely scraping by. Evelyn funded new beds, mental health care, legal assistance for women who were being forced out of their homes by sons, husbands, or daughters-in-law who saw them as burdens, just like she'd once been seen. Now she was the benefactor, not a background figure, not a sunroom tenant, but the storm who rewrote the rules. A month later, a journalist from a local lifestyle magazine stopped by. She'd heard whispers about the woman who served eviction papers and tea in the same week. They talked over scones and blackcurrant jam. Evelyn wore soft pastels and no apology. The article appeared the following Sunday, "The Matriarch Who Took Her Power Back." Evelyn Harper turned quiet abuse into a movement and her home into a haven. She didn't read the comments. She didn't need validation. But the next gathering brought in 4 new women, none of whom knew her from the article, just from word of mouth. That was enough. Meanwhile, across town, Natalie paced in a sterile apartment above a frozen yogurt shop. She had received her termination notice a week earlier. HR cited public misrepresentation and ongoing litigation. The final line read simply, "This decision is irreversible." Her real estate license? Technically still valid, but no one in the network would return her calls, and her inbox was full of unsubscribes. Evelyn didn't speak of her again, not out of denial, out of design. Some ghosts deserved nothing but distance. One afternoon, while collecting mail from the front gate, Evelyn paused at a small white envelope tucked between catalogs and a community flyer. No return address, just her name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside, a simple postcard. The front, a sunflower field under a gray sky. The back, only 10 words. "I know I failed you, but I miss you. J." Her fingers lingered on the card. For the first time in weeks, her breath caught, not in pain, in memory, of the boy who used to bring her dandelions. Not the man who stood silently behind Natalie. She placed the card on the windowsill, didn't frame it, didn't reply. But she didn't throw it away either. That night, as rain whispered against the glass, Evelyn sat beneath a quilt sewn by one of her guests and whispered, "Maybe redemption starts with a seed." In the corner, the sunflower card watched her back. "They tried to erase me. I became permanent ink." The motel smelled like bleach and regret. Evelyn stood outside room 212, hands tucked in the pockets of her long gray coat, listening to the faint buzz of a dying vending machine nearby. It was quiet except for the occasional drone of passing traffic and the muted flicker of a neon vacancy sign outside. She knocked once. Firm, final. Jason opened the door, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, hope flickering. "Mom," he said softly. "You came." She stepped in without speaking. The room was a dull box of beige, mass-produced art above the bed, a cheap desk pushed against the wall, and half a burger sitting cold on a napkin. Evelyn looked around. "You always hated motels." Jason gave a small laugh. "Still do." She sat on the corner chair by the window facing him. The silence stretched between them, not cruel, not cold, but weighted. Jason finally broke it. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I wanted you to know I left because of me, not you." Evelyn nodded once. Not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. Jason looked down at his hands. "She never loved me, you know. Natalie, not really." He didn't look up when he continued. "She loved my inheritance, my potential, my ability to secure things." Evelyn didn't blink. "She calculated you, not cherished you." He looked up at that, at the word calculated, as if it finally articulated something he'd been trying to name for years. "I kept thinking maybe if I just kept things smooth," he said, "we'd all survive it." Evelyn sipped from the thermos she brought with her. Chamomile. "Survival and silence look similar, until they don't." He swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" "No." "Do you still love me?" She paused, then stood and walked to the desk, placing something down, a single manila folder. Inside, a copy of the updated will, with his name missing. "I'm open to forgiveness," she said, "but not inheritance." Jason's lips parted, but she held up her hand. "This," she tapped the folder, "was never punishment. It was clarity. You want a second chance? Earn it where I can't see it." He picked up the folder. "Read." Didn't cry. But something inside him sank visibly. He looked back at her. "Why come here at all?" Evelyn exhaled, slow and sure. "To say goodbye to the version of you that waited for a woman like her to define your worth." Jason sat down, hollow. Evelyn approached the window, staring out at the parking lot. She never knew the real asset wasn't the house. Jason looked up. "It was the signature," Evelyn said. "Mine, on every loan, every clause, every lifeboat flashback." Rain tapped against the window as a younger Evelyn stood at her kitchen table, pen in hand, 3 days after burying her husband. The legal files spread out before her, tears unshed. Her husband had done his part, she was about to do hers. She signed the clause, created the trust, filed the amendment, not out of fear, but future. That was the night she stopped being the widow and became the architect. Back in the motel, Jason whispered, "I always thought you were quiet because you didn't want to fight." Evelyn gave him a small, sad smile. "Number I was quiet because I was fighting, just not for the version of life you thought I owed you." She turned toward the door. Jason stood, panic flickering. "Wait, one last question. Have you heard from her?" Evelyn paused at the door, reached into her coat pocket, removed a folded piece of paper, laid it on the table. Jason unfolded it. His hands trembled. "Natalie Harper Linden, license revoked, permanently blacklisted from all regional real estate associations." No explanation, no defense, just the stamp, sanctioned, ethics violation. Jason didn't speak, and Evelyn didn't wait. She stepped out into the night, the wind tugging gently at her coat. Behind her, room 212's light dimmed. In her pocket she carried nothing but keys, a folded map, and silence. No longer survival, but sovereignty. "She leased space in my home, never in my legacy." The house was quiet now, not the uncomfortable silence of suppressed tension, but the earned stillness of peace reclaimed. Evelyn stood in the center of the living room with a measuring tape in one hand and a floor plan in the other. Sunlight poured through the windows she'd once been hidden behind, touching everything like a benediction. Today wasn't about keeping the house. It was about extending it. By late afternoon, the moving van was half full, not with furniture, but with purpose. Boxes marked art supplies, legal resources, and donated devices were stacked with care. The quilted armchair she'd spent so many evenings in was folded in soft plastic, ready for its new home, a downtown building freshly leased under her charity's name, Matriarch Creative Center, a place to begin again. She wasn't downsizing. She was dividing power, spreading it to the women who needed space to speak, paint, cry, and draft their own lives. The walls she left behind were not empty. They held echoes of hard choices and soft victories. One room had been converted into a mini law library with binders titled Tenant Rights, Trust Clauses, and Silent Abuse, Legal Redress. Another had become a makeshift podcast booth where she taught women how to tell their stories in their own voices. She called the series What They Thought We'd Never Say. At the new center, Jason arrived early and stayed late. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He moved chairs, organized donations, brewed coffee for the guest speakers. Sometimes he watched from the corner while Evelyn mentored women old enough to be her peers and young enough to be her past. Not once did he call her mom, but when someone asked, "Who's that helping with setup?" she answered plainly, "Family, reapplying." Late one evening, in the soft light of her now half-empty office, Evelyn stared at the title page of a manuscript she'd been hiding beneath receipts and blueprints for years. The Cigna. By anonymous she hit upload. It wasn't meant to go viral. It wasn't even meant to be noticed. But sometimes truth sneaks past algorithms. By week's end, a literary podcast reached out, run by a woman in her 30s who had stumbled across the memoir and couldn't sleep until she finished it. The host's voice shook on the voicemail. "I don't know who you are, but I know every woman who's ever been made to feel invisible needs to hear you speak." Evelyn didn't respond. Not at first. She let the message sit for 3 days before calling back and saying only, "Let's do this. No names. Just impact." The interview was raw, clean, and electric. The host asked thoughtful questions. Evelyn answered with grace, grit, and clarity that stunned the listeners. She shared how financial documents were survival blueprints, how silence can be louder than screams, how legacy wasn't built from inheritance, it was defended by it. She ended with one line that caught fire. "She leased space in my home, but never in my legacy." By morning, the episode had gone viral, #1 on the elder empowerment charts, reposted by legal reform groups, aging rights activists, and even a celebrity who captioned it, "This voice? She's not done yet." That night, Evelyn sat beneath her favorite reading lamp as her phone lit up with notifications. She turned it face down, smiled softly, and whispered to herself, "This is how you leave something behind that no one can evict. Fragile things break. I rebuilt." The morning was soft and golden, the kind of quiet that only comes after something has ended, cleanly, finally. Evelyn stepped out onto the back porch, barefoot, letting her soles press into the cool stone before stepping onto the dew-covered grass. The early sun clung to every surface, gilding the garden in a gentle hush, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like something missing. It felt earned. Each step through the garden's winding path was unhurried, deliberate. Her robe flowed behind her like a painter's apron, flecked with stray pieces of lint and petals from the day before. She moved among the lavender, her fingers grazing their tops, releasing their scent into the air. It reminded her of summer afternoons from long ago, the kind that ended with lemonade and hard truths between the pages of her journal. The house loomed behind her, not in a threatening way anymore, but like a castle that had finally been restored to its rightful queen. Through the kitchen window, she could see a single item on the sill, a frame with a cream-colored sheet of paper inside, carefully matted and displayed. Her signature, crisp and confident, sat centered above the typed clause that had once been buried in a velvet envelope for years. "To be enacted if they ever make you feel small. Activated." That word, once dormant, had become her shield, her sword, and her voice all at once. Inside, the radio murmured from the breakfast nook. A news segment was recapping the impact of a recent story that had gone viral, a retired widow whose anonymous memoir had sparked public discourse around elder abuse and financial erasure. Evelyn caught only fragments through the open window. One signature, trust amendment, changed the legal precedent for multiple ongoing cases in the region. She didn't need to hear the rest. The story belonged to her, but she had given it to others now. It was no longer a private bruise. It was a blueprint. She knelt beside her garden bed and began pulling at the weeds with her hands, dirt gathering beneath her fingernails. She didn't wear gloves anymore. She wanted to feel everything. Even the stubborn roots, tangled and buried deep, came up easier now. With each one she yanked loose, her breath steadied. A sound of gravel crunching under cautious steps made her look up. Jason stood at the edge of the path near the gate, holding something behind his back. He wore a plain button-down shirt, no jacket, as if stripped of all armor. His posture wasn't defensive this time. It was something humbler. He didn't call out. He didn't ask permission to enter. He simply waited. She rose slowly, brushing soil from her knees, and walked toward him. There was no tension in her steps, just a practiced calm. When she reached him, he pulled the object from behind his back and held it out between them. A sunflower, bright, uncut, raw from the stem. No ribbon, no card, just something simple and whole, held with two hands. He didn't say a word, and Evelyn didn't demand one. She took the flower, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. Then she turned toward the porch, not inviting him in, but not shutting him out either. They sat beside each other on the wooden steps without speaking. Birds called in the distance. A soft breeze ran through the hedges. The world did not rush them. Jason looked down at his hands, the way he used to when he was a boy who'd done something wrong but didn't know how to make it right. "I listen now," he said finally. She nodded once. Good. A long silence passed before he added, "They keep quoting you." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh? Ink can tear empires apart." He exhaled. "That line's everywhere. It's powerful." Evelyn looked out over the garden, her eyes landing once more on the framed claws in the window. Her voice was steady, but her words cut like soft steel. "They thought I was fragile. I just needed a pen. She said I didn't matter. I replied in pen."